I was 25 years old when I fell prey to my predatory pastor, who is a much older man. He is even older than my father. He was supposed to be my spiritual mentor. He used the information I gave him in a therapy session against me. I married my husband very early, before I turned 18. We had a good relationship. He is 29 years old now. We have been through so much together and I love him very much. However, I felt like he began to focus on work and wasn't there for me emotionally. Before you pass judgment, allow me to give you some background so you can understand the context of how this affair happened. I was 17 when I got married to my husband, and he was 21. My parents were completely opposed to our marriage. First they thought I was too young for him, then they said I hadn't finished high school yet. They had a college trust fund set up since I was 5 years old, so they had plans for me to go to college, but I thought I knew it all. At that tender age I thought I knew better, and like many rebellious teens at the time I ran away from home to marry my now husband. He was in a boy band at that time. He convinced me that he was going places, that he was going to be a rock star, that he was at the early stage of blowing up to a superstar. They would go on tours and about 300 to 500 people would show up. In my teenage mind I thought that was the most impressive thing ever. 2 months after I ran away from home, I got pregnant. I just turned 18 and about to be a mother on the road with a bunch of rockstar wannabes. The rockstar fantasy cleared up and we had to grow up really fast. I realized that my husband's band wasn't that good, in fact they sucked, like really bad. They barely made enough money from the concert because they are having to share their revenue with other bands that were on tour with them because they couldn't draw all that crowd on their own. Well, soon enough the band disbanded, since playing music wasn't generating enough income for a 3-square meal. Like I said earlier, we had to grow up really fast. We struggled to make our daily bread, we panhandled, hitchhiked till we had our second child. At that time it was clear to my husband that he needed to get a real job, and we needed to settle down somewhere because all this traveling was not good for our children, and we needed help. I didn't have a good relationship with my parents at the time. They would have helped if I asked them for the sake of their grandkids, but I was too proud to ask for help, plus their help comes with conditions. My parents are strict Pentecostal, the speaking in tongues kind, the kinds that think that premarital sex was one of the deadly sins. Well, I guess most Christians think that way. I grew up going to church every day, we prayed all the time and they read the scriptures to me and my siblings every day. When I was living with my parents, I felt envious of other children with less strict and controlling parents. So, when I met my now husband, I saw my ticket to escape my rigid upbringing. Hence, the options to seek help from my parents were there, but I didn't want to come back as a failure. I didn't want to be the prodigal daughter. I didn't want them to think that they were right all along. My husband on the other hand grew up in a halfway home. He didn't know who his parents were. From an early age he was very passionate and dedicated himself to anything he put his mind to, so in his early teens he gathered some neighborhood kids, and they formed a band to stay out of trouble. I thought that was commendable. Back then they seemed cool, and all the girls wanted them, so I felt special, but they were not good enough to make it to the big leagues. When it became clear that we couldn't make enough income off touring, we decided to settle down, at least in one city. My husband was always in between one temp job to the next. I took care of the kids while he hustled. Luckily, he was smart enough to finish high school so he could easily get a minimum wage job. I on the other hand didn't finish. Actually, I was in my final semester of high school when I ran away with my husband. At this point I had no marketable skills, which is why I regretted not finishing high school or going to college because I was a good student while it lasted. I guess my rebellious nature got in the way. I felt like I was missing something, and I needed an adventure. I felt like I wanted to experience the world. Ultimately, my parents were right. My 2 younger siblings were back home and doing really well. I ring my younger siblings to keep in touch with them. At this time, I had 3 children, so it was really challenging. We could barely afford a place to stay, so we were moving from one motel to another, and we would sleep under the bridge when we ran out of money. Lots of homeless people, mentally deranged people, and drugs and users all around us, and my husband even got into it as well. We were constantly fighting and arguing about money. I wanted him to man up and make more money. I wanted him to get a job so we can live in an apartment and get away from this misery because I didn't want my kids to continue to live in this condition. It was hard to see my kids go hungry or lack the basic necessities. We got so broke I even considered turning tricks, but my husband wouldn't allow it. But it was hard to watch my kids go without food or place to stay, so I started turning tricks behind my husband's back. I only stopped after I was brutally assaulted when a customer refused to pay. Not only that, he brandished a weapon and beat me bloodied. He stole my money and left me for dead. The trauma still stayed with me till this day. Strangers found me in a pool of blood and rushed me to the hospital. I was afraid to share with my boyfriend what really happened. I just told him that I was robbed. After I was discharged from the hospital, we were left with using shelters and food pantries across town, which helped for a while. We were at our wits' end when we reached out to a Pentecostal church that helped us with food and accommodation. I grew up in a Pentecostal church, so I knew the right things to say and do to easily gain their trust and sympathy. The condition given to us was that we would come to church and help out with cleaning and also serve as ushers during service. It wasn't like a forced condition or anything. Our understanding was that they would help us get our lives together and in so doing bring us closer to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. The church was able to help my husband through a 2-year programming degree. After he graduated, he got a job at a startup company. And we started getting a bit of money. We became independent from the church and were able to live in an apartment for the first time. I was able to have a space I could call my own without having to move every week. This was tremendous, not just for me but my kids as well. Everything was looking up, but at the cost of my husband staying at work all day long. Sometimes he would spend 15 hours at work and would bring home his laptop to continue working from home. The problem with him is once he focuses on one thing, he becomes obsessed with it. Don't get me wrong, the money was great, and we were able to afford really nice things, which was what I have been forcing him to do, especially now that we have my 4th child, but the problem is that I barely see him. I was about 23 years old at the time with 3 kids. My life circles around going to the church, hosting programs and services for the church and babysitting kids for my church members, then coming home and being a stay-at-home mom. This was really not the life I envisioned. I thought I would be married to a rock star, tour the world, have kids when I'm 30 and settle down. My husband, who used to be the long hair ready to fight, pot-smoking bad boy, is now a clean-shaved computer nerd. We became less affectionate, as he devoted most of his time to his job. He became really boring. Every conversation was all about his job and the project he is working on and how he is going to be making lots more money. I was really happy for him because I felt like he had found something that he was really good at. They appreciated him at his job, and in a very short time he was making 6 figures. Things were looking good for us. It was a true story of coming from the bottom to the top. I finally had the chance to rub it on my parents' face. I was so proud of my husband that things turned out well for us, but deep inside I still felt unfulfilled. About 5 years later, I was more involved in the church, hosting services, and sometimes teaching Bible studies. Additionally, to earn some extra income with all the free time I had, I opened a daycare on the side as well. The daycare was just to keep myself busy because my husband's income has grown exponentially at this point. With more money comes more time spent on his job, more time to learn this program or that program or travel for work. He was married to his job, and I felt alone. I felt like he was a roommate to me. There would be times when we would go for weeks without having sex. First I thought he was cheating on me or had another family by the side, but wrong, he was clean as a whistle. Back to now, at 26 years old, husband makes good money, family more financially stable than ever, but still being weighed by memory of being brutally assaulted and accumulated of postnatal depression had taken a toll on me, so I still felt depressed, unhappy, and lonely. I occupied my time with my kids. I started falling into depression, then I started gaining weight. We moved to a different part of town, better neighborhood, and we joined a different church. My husband wasn't as active in church as I was. He is the type that only goes to church every other Sundays. We both recognized that our marriage was on the rocks and wanted to proactively do something to improve our relationship. We knew that the church offered a marriage counseling session, and I suggested that we attend one together. Although my husband felt that our marriage was fine, he knows there is room for improvements, he reluctantly agreed to it because he saw that I wanted it. Our senior pastor normally carried out the marriage counseling. He is usually very busy, and everybody wanted his attention because he is very smart. He knows the scriptures like the back of his hand and seems to have an answer to every question. Our first session was on a Monday evening. He spent most of the time getting to know us and our relationship dynamics. He is great at making us feel comfortable and talkative. In our 45-minute session, he was able to disarm our defenses and get us talking. He recommended in our first session that we should dedicate more time to talking about ourselves and enjoy time together without involving work or the kids. He also gave us some practical techniques to use in order to improve our communication. He also told us that it would be a great idea to travel on vacations, which is something that I had suggested to my husband many times, but he has always been procrastinating. Our next counseling session was scheduled 2 weeks from that day. When we got home, we practiced most of what he taught us, and in a short time frame we were able to improve our communication dramatically, but there were still plenty of rooms for improvement. 2 weeks later, my husband was in the middle of a product launch, and it was impossible for him to make it to the counseling session, so I called ahead of time and left a message. The pastor's personal assistant contacted me later, saying that the pastor would like to see me anyways for an individual counseling, and that I should come regardless and that we could do individual counseling. I remember arriving at his office 20 minutes early. He was counseling another couple. I was waiting in the lobby until it was my turn. When I entered his office, I was very apologetic about my husband, but he said it was all right and told me to have a sit on the couch. Our conversation started out with us talking about the relationship with my husband and the improvements we have noticed so far, then it veered toward personal hobbies and what I do for fun, etc. He gave me some flattering compliments but nothing inappropriate, which was well received. Then he started sharing his experiences of things he has accomplished in his life. It was almost like two friends chatting. Just few minutes of our conversation in the beginning was about my relationship with my husband. The rest was me and the pastor getting to know each other and sharing personal stories and laughs. I wasn't really attracted to him, but I was comfortable around him. I felt like I could say anything and not be judged. I felt like I could ask any question and get a good response, and for the first time since I was brutally assaulted, I told him what really happened and shared with him my traumatic experience that I have never shared with anyone, not even my husband. For once it was refreshing to feel like I'm speaking with a grown-up. The counseling session went over our allotted time. Another couple were in the wing ready for their turn, so his secretary knocked on his door to let him know that another couple was waiting. Instead of scheduling another session with my husband, we scheduled another individual counseling. I didn't question why. When he suggested that we schedule an individual counseling, I knew something wasn't right, because the original plan was a couples counseling to build the relationship between me and my husband, to bring us closer together, by teaching us how to communicate better. Deep inside I knew things was veering off course, but I felt like since he was so comfortable and has been doing it for a long time, I trust that he knew best, and it was part of the process. I enjoyed his presence and I find him intriguing. When I went home, my husband was a little surprised that we didn't cancel the session. I told him that the pastor felt like there were a lot of things that I needed to work through. I knew this wasn't entirely true. I don't know if it made sense to my husband, but he was glad that he didn't have to go again. Perhaps it was because the counseling was my idea to begin with and he was doing it to shut me up. That pastor has been in that church since I started, but I never really noticed him or looked at him any differently prior to our marriage counseling sessions. The next session was scheduled for next week. I suspected that something was wrong because counseling is bi-weekly, not weekly, since he was always super busy. Even his personal assistant made a comment in passing that weekly counseling is rare, and I must be lucky. I took it as my problem must be really dire. I didn't really know how to handle it, but I responded by smiling and feeling like someone cares enough to take time out of their busy day for me. On the Sunday before the individual counseling, the pastor was preaching a sermon. Couldn't tell you what the sermon was about, but I remember how I felt about it. I felt really proud and overwhelmed by him. As ridiculous as that sound, it was like knowing a celebrity. I found a new appreciation for him seeing him on the pulpit that day. He is not particularly good-looking or strike me as an impressive figure. He was in his mid-50s, gray hair, physically fit, about 5 feet 8 inches, not as impressive as my 6 feet 1 inch husband, but he dresses nice. All his outfits are starched in iron, and he pays attention to the finest details. I have heard several sermons from this pastor before, but have never felt the way that I was feeling that Sunday. He was more charismatic than I remember. I wouldn't go as far as saying that he was as captivating as a rock star on the altar, but it was close. I guess at this point I started understanding why people thought he was so great. That may be why the secretary said that I was lucky that he scheduled an individual counseling with me in such short interval. I felt lucky that I would have the opportunity to see him again. I don't know why I felt this way. I naively thought that he had a fatherly love for me, and I had little control over how I felt. I was thinking that maybe I was feeling this way because I have never had the opportunity to appear vulnerable to another man other than my husband. I have shared the darkest trauma that happened to me with him, and I wasn't able to share it with my husband. On the day before the individual counseling, I was feeling anxious and apprehensive. I was thinking that maybe I may have a secret crush on him, which is embarrassing, and he may not be feeling the same way, so I might be completely reading things the wrong way. Moreover, he is married, and I am married. That thought alone is a sin in of itself, and I should stop before it gets any further, but within me I wanted to explore further. I thought it was just a girly crush that would pass when I get to know him more. On the day of the counseling, I believe it was a Monday, I was so nervous I almost cancelled. I mustered enough courage to attend regardless. Much like the other session, this session was just a chat about our life, except that we didn't mention anything about my husband. I sat across the couch from him, so it was really like a therapist couch session. My next 2 sessions with him was similar, except that we became more comfortable with one another. My husband used to ask me how the session was going, and I would say it was going great. At that point I was feeling good about my marriage because I felt like I had an outlet. I was treating my husband well, I wasn't nagging him like he used to complain about, and we weren't fighting as we used to. I have another outlet to explore what I was missing in my relationship. The next session was scheduled late in the evening, around 8 p.m. after evening service. I thought the timing was unusual because it didn't fall under the normal counseling days, and the front office secretary was not present, but I was so comfortable that I didn't really mind. I felt like I was coming down with a cold, so I had a turtleneck sweater on. As soon as I came into his office, he noticed that I was acting chilly. He used that opportunity to sit close to me. He asked me how I was doing, and I said that I felt like my temperature was running high. He came closer to me, and I felt his presence. Then he placed the back of his palm on my neck to check my temperature. I felt the chill running down once he touched my cheek, which startled me, so he immediately removed his palms from the side of my neck and said your temperature seemed normal. Since I was convinced that my temperature was creeping up, I took his hands and pressed it again at the same spot to try to convince him that my temperature was running up. At that point we were so close together that I could feel the tension. Before I could say a word, he leaned forward and tried to kiss me on the lip. I responded by turning my face away from him, exposing the side of my neck. He started kissing my neck, then down to my cleavage. I was so shocked at this time I didn't even move. I just let him do it. I was frozen. I didn't know what to do, so I just let him continue. I was still frozen at this point as he raised his head and pushed my face towards his lips to kiss me. I resisted slightly, but we continued, and he started fondling me for what seemed like forever. I wanted to get it over with, so I just allowed him to do what he wanted. He reached his hand downstairs and tried to finger me, but I resisted. He tried to unbutton my pants, but I wouldn't let him, so we just kissed. At some point I slowly started pulling back. I was starting to come back to my senses, and a feeling of guilt started to grow inside. I felt like things escalated quickly. I pushed him away slightly with my face down. I told him that we can't do this. I stood up from the couch without looking back, and I left his office. I went home that day feeling guilty about what happened. I felt like I have committed a great sin. More than that, I felt like it was my fault, like I tempted him. I caused a man of God to sin. I was so depressed I didn't go to church for 2 weeks. My husband noticed my state, but of course I didn't tell him the truth. I was afraid of what would happen. I didn't know what he would do, so it was too risky for him to know. After 2 weeks I was feeling better. No depression, and even the feeling of guilt had subsided. I began to get back to normal. I was feeling less ashamed of the incident that happened. One day I received a call from a number that I didn't recognize. I answered, and it was my pastor's private phone number. It's been 3 weeks since he tried to force himself upon me. I was surprised that it was him. Maybe I shouldn't be. He apologized for what transpired, told me that it wouldn't happen again, and went on about how it was a sin, and he is not above it, but it happened in the moment, but that doesn't excuse it. He told me that I shouldn't abandon going to church because of it. During his apology I was so naive or maybe overwhelmed or uncomfortable that I kept saying, "No, it's okay," like I was trying to apologize as well, so it was easy at that moment to keep saying yes to everything he was saying even though deep inside I wasn't incongruent with him. The conversation was so awkward that I felt like I had to say yes, yes, and agree with him to make him go away. During the phone conversation, while he was trying to convince me to come back to the church, he mentioned that he could cancel the individual counseling session to ease any fears that I may have, but I don't know why I said no, it's okay. I was just on autopilot, trying not to descend to anything he said. As soon as he got off the phone, I almost smashed the phone on the floor. I couldn't believe that I just agreed to returning back to the church. I couldn't believe that I agreed to another counseling session. What I should have done in hindsight is to not go back and block his number, but I'm the kind of person that always did as I promised. Moreover, I still have so much respect and admiration for him. I was afraid to offend or disappoint him. I knew that I may put myself in a situation that would create temptation for adultery, but I went along with it anyway. Sunday came and I sat at the back of the church. It was a semi-large-sized church, about 1,500 to 1,600 or so members, and I thought I could be lost in the crowd, and maybe nobody noticed me, but no. After the service I was about to leave, when an usher walks up to me and told me that the pastor wanted to see me. I went to the pastor's office. There were other members of the church there as well waiting to speak with him, so I waited for my turn. When I went to his office, he greeted me with his familiar charming style. He seemed genuinely happy to see me. A few minutes into our conversation I felt really comfortable. It was like all was forgiven and forgotten, almost like the soul encounter never happened. We scheduled another time for me to come see him. He didn't try to pretend like it was some counseling session. It was so weird, almost like a date of some kind. To me he seems like a busy man, a man of authority. People gathered outside his office to speak with him, so I guess it was a privilege that he found some time in his day to see me. The counseling session was late in the evening again, like a rerun of a horror movie that I signed up for. The secretary wasn't there again. Immediately after I walked into the door, he greeted me with a hug. He made sure our cheeks rubbed against each other as I was pulling away. He tried to kiss me on the lips, and I let him. He went from kissing to slowly taking my clothes off. One thing led to another, and I was on his couch wearing only my bra and panties. He convinced me to then take them off and had sex with me on his office sofa. After that, he made me promise to see him again. Then I went home feeling guilty about the whole thing. I felt dirty, like I was back to my days when I was turning tricks behind my husband's back. I was fighting with my conscience. I could say no and expose him, but there was another part of me that was like a robot tethered to a controller, and my pastor is the gamer. We continued to meet up at his church office and sometime at the hotel to avoid any suspicion. He was the only one making all the moves and arrangement and meet-up locations. He likes being in charge. I just agreed. Strangely enough, I felt like the relationship with my husband started improving because I didn't demand much from him. He too noticed the change and was happy about it, only if he knew the real reason, and I couldn't help feeling guilty. I struggled with my conscience, trying to justify the relationship with my pastor and being a true believer at the same time, but it's much difficult when your spiritual leader is the one that is always forcing you to sin. He continues to preach against the same thing we would be doing that night after service. It hits me more when I see his wife by his side and his 2 kids that are older than me. He is still comfortable preaching every Sunday and Wednesday in front of all these faithful people. At the time, a part of me felt like he was a charlatan and a master manipulator, but of course back then I was still caught up in the fog of the affair. At this point, the affair had been going on for about 4 months now. He opened my eyes to a lot of erotic experiences, some of which were depraved and provocative. I am not the type that watched adult content or ever find pleasure watching other people engage in intercourse, so my only experience with intimate positions are the proverbial missionary and doggy positions. My husband has tried to convince me to try other things in the bedroom, but I haven't always been receptive, because of the trauma that I suffered way back when we were on the streets. However, I have done things with the pastor that my husband wanted, but I turned him down. That really made me feel more guilty, and the worst of it was that I even felt like I was cheating on the pastor with my husband. My affair revealed to me the extent of how boring my soul relationship was with my husband. Sad to say that I felt submissive towards the pastor, and in a strange way, even though I knew in the back of my mind that he was using me. I felt guilty that I am trying new things with this man that I don't love and don't intend to be with, and I haven't tried it with my husband. It hunted me, so much so that I forced myself to start trying it with my husband as well after years of turning him down. What I realized during my time with the pastor was that I was being selfish during intimacy with my husband, blaming him for what happened to me in the past, blaming him for my past trauma, blaming him for the reasons why we were homeless and subconsciously holding everything over his head. Sex with him was to pleasure me and I had little consideration about him. I didn't allow myself to enjoy sex with him after my assault. But after I started the affair with the pastor, I felt guilty, and out of guilt, I made a deliberate decision to spice things up with my husband. Those depravities that I have acted out with the pastor, I wanted to try it with my husband to lessen the guilt of the affair. One evening when my husband came home from work, I prepared a bath for both of us. I haven't done that before, gave him BJ and was intimate with him on the bath. That night we did things that we haven't done before. It was like a new experience for us, and he was taken aback by it. He wanted to know why I was so adventurous all of a sudden, and I told him that I was just trying out new things. He made a joke by saying that was it what I learned in therapy? That threw me off for a second, and he noticed how much I overreacted defensively, because I was upset about it and got into a fight. He apologized but took a mental note. His comment really scared me. It began to dawn on me how risky the affair with my pastor was. I started to think about the consequence of what would happen if my husband happened to stumble on the truth. I was so paranoid that I thought he was testing me. I thought he may already know something but was pretending like he doesn't know. The next morning when my husband left for work, I was really shaken up by what he said the night before. I suspected that he knew something and I panicked, and I started a chain reaction that would turn my life upside down. I texted the pastor saying that my husband is suspicious about us, and I sent some detailed information by text which I shouldn't have and would later come back to bite me. The pastor called me and requested that we have a meeting immediately because he doesn't want to communicate by text or on the phone. We met at a restaurant outside of town. He normally disguises himself. For some reason I was nervous about the meeting. I wanted to end the affair, but I had a strong feeling that he wouldn't take it well based on how controlling he has become recently, so I downloaded an app to record our conversation. He came early before me and picked a table. He was drinking coffee when I arrived. My recording was on. The first question he asks me was how my husband knew. I told him that I am not sure whether he knows or whether he is playing mind games. I told him that we need to stop seeing each other, because I was nervous about being discovered. He responded, "That is that all?" I said yes. He said that I should not rush to judgment, and I shouldn't panic. He told me that I shouldn't text or call using my phone. He said that he would buy me a burner phone so we could talk to each other on it. I responded that he doesn't understand, and he is not listening to what I was saying. I told him that I wanted us to stop seeing each other because my husband may find out. I asked him why he is not so concerned, that he would lose everything. I told him that he has more to lose than me, so he should want it to end more than me. He said he understand, but he loves me so much, which is why he was taking all this risk. At this point I thought he was crazy. I didn't love him. I thought of him as a mistake, a predator that used my emotions and vulnerabilities against me. An escape from my normal life and a grown-up that had all the answers. So, I was worried. We both came out of the meeting with different conclusions. He wants to slow down and wants us to be more careful about the affair to avoid discovery. I on the other hand already decided that I wanted to end it. The next day a FedEx driver delivered a package that required a signature. It turned out to be a burner phone from my pastor. I thought it was insane and risky for him to do that. To me this has gotten out of hand, and I thought it was another way he wanted to use to control me. I didn't even use the phone. I wanted to throw it in the trash, but I changed my mind at the last minute. We normally meet at a scheduled location on Thursday, but I didn't show up that day. He called my phone, and I picked up. He asks me why I didn't show up and why I wasn't using the burner phone he sent me. I responded that I no longer wanted to do this anymore. He started putting pressure on me, saying that this is something that we have to discuss in person. I told him that I felt like he was being too needy, and it was very unattractive, and that we are taking too much risk, which is one of the reasons why we should call things off. After that phone call I didn't hear from him for a while. I began to work on my relationship with my husband. It was great for a while. We stopped fighting and arguing. I intentionally paid attention to how I treat him to improve our relationship. In the bedroom aspect, I told him to do what he wants to do without asking for permission and be more in control. It took him a while to get used to it because it didn't come off naturally. He reduced his hours at work so he could spend more time with me and the kids. This went on for a while, but it didn't seem natural to him, didn't take long, but he slowly but surely reverted to his old self, which was frustrating. At this point it was maybe about 2 or 3 months since I stopped seeing the pastor, and I haven't been to that church since then. I even started searching for a church for my children and I. My old church people called us to check on us and to ask why we hadn't been coming, and I told them that we are planning on moving out of the area. Even my husband thought it was strange that I abruptly stopped attending church and going to therapy. We found another church, started attending, we started to settle, everything was back to normal, my kids were happy with the new church and my husband only went once. He is not a frequent churchgoer, he rather watches football on Sundays. Well, our intimacy went back to being normal and I went back to my old self, gained a couple of pounds, depressed as hell, and loneliness started to creep in. I decided to find a real therapist this time. I found a female therapist. I tried to make it a couples thing by inviting my husband to join me, but he refused to go. I went for only 4 sessions before I quit, because it wasn't doing it for me. One Sunday I made the mistake of going back to my old church. It would be a lie if I tell you that I don't know why I went back. Maybe because I wanted to see my fellow church members, maybe I wanted to see the pastor again, maybe I wanted my life to go back to what it used to be a few months ago because I was starting to feel miserable. After the service, some of the church members that knew me recognized me. Because they haven't seen me for so long, they gathered around and started chatting me up. We were talking and catching up. I guess the pastor must have identified me from the small commotion. He approached me. At first, he was curious why I was there. He asked if I could come to his office so we could talk. I did. There were a lot of people in line there to meet him, but I was jumped in front of everyone and was brought straight to his office. He wanted to know how I was doing. He didn't try to ask me why I left or why I came back. He just assumed that I was there to see him. He acted like he was concerned about my well-being. He asked me if I wanted to see him again, but I didn't really say anything. I guess I was shy, but he set a date for us to meet, so I agreed. And that was how we started seeing each other again. This time wasn't that frequent, just once a week. Our meeting location wasn't at the church office, just strictly hotels and parking lots sometimes. I avoided going to his church and stayed at my new home church. About 2 months after the affair started again, one day, he canceled for the first time. He said that things were not going well for him and that he would talk to me later. He sounded really strange, but I didn't think anything of it. The following day my husband came back from work. He confronted me with a local paper in hand. The local newspaper had a headline story about the pastor. Apparently multiple women from that church came forward to expose their ongoing affair with the pastor to someone at the papers. The paper also claimed that there might be several other women that haven't come forward yet. Knowing that I was just one of many women was simply devastating to my self-esteem. He was having an affair with several other women along with me. One of them claimed that it has been going on for years, the other one said it was recent, and they also said that they were filing a lawsuit against him. It was during the height of the #MeToo movement. My husband confronted me about him. He said that he suspected that I was having an affair with the pastor as well because of all the therapy sessions. He said that my story is similar to the stories of the other women that are coming forward. So, it didn't take him long to make the connection. He wanted me to admit to it, but I denied it. I thought he wouldn't be able to prove it. Well, I was wrong. He was able to retrieve all the text messages I deleted on my phone. I don't know how he did it, but the evidence was right there. I finally came clean but tried to convince him that he forced himself on me, but it was hard to believe that because he could see the frequency of our calls and some of the deleted text messages. Moreover, he said that I should have informed him about it, and in any case, I was guilty of cheating. I tried to explain to him for the first time about the assault I suffered when we were homeless and the real truth about what happened, and he wouldn't even believe me. I felt like he didn't care about me, and I know it would be devastating for me and my kids if he leaves us, so I pleaded for forgiveness, but he shocked me by saying that our relationship has been over for a while. He made an accurate connection on how long the affair had been going on. I felt ashamed and was devastated on how it affected my husband and how it destroyed my family. He left home that day and didn't come back for 2 days. The following day he told me that we were separating and that I should hire a lawyer. My husband made really good money, and at the time I was unemployed. On the separation agreement, I would have primary custody of the kids, and some alimony. He also allowed me to keep the family home for the sake of my kids. I really regretted my action. I really wish my husband would come to realize that I was taken advantage of by a predator, and it wasn't my intention to have an affair with that nasty old man. What hurt the most is that this pastor was a pig and has done the same thing to multiple vulnerable women that came for him for help. He used me for sex just like he used those other women. Nobody knows how many women he was using in a church or elsewhere. I would like to think that I was a victim because he manipulated me and cost me the love of my life and separated my family. I was more upset when I learned that he got off so easy. Unfortunately, the court dismissed the case brought against him by those women because it was reported that the act was consensual, and get this, he admitted to the affairs and confessed his sins in front of the congregation. The elders placed him and his wife on a 120-day paid leave and ordered them to attend marriage counseling twice a week. He'll be back on the pulpit and serving as lead pastor again after the suspension. The young women were not publicly revealed, but most members knew who they were not offered counseling, and they permanently left the church. It seems like they were mostly blamed. Since I don't go to church any longer, I don't know if they knew that he preyed on me as well, but I spoke to a friend of mine that was still going to the church, and she gave me all the details. I really feel like that pastor deserved a special place in hell for what he had done to me. And worst of all, it really shaped my faith. Now I am currently separated from my husband, divorce is still pending, but I am still hoping that he will reconsider and reconcile, because we have been through worse